You really need to be careful who you get your banking advice from. If you click the wrong video, you might end up with bank accounts you can't use in countries that you've never heard of, paying thousands in unnecessary fees. And you wouldn't get a functional bank account that offers what you were actually after in the first place. But all of this, it's totally unnecessary. So in this video, I'm putting a stop to it by sharing 7 of the worst, most costly, and even dangerous pieces of banking advice that you can find on YouTube from some of the most popular financial influencers who you need to stop listening to when it comes to banking. And to make sure you can spot this bad advice for yourself, I'm also going to be telling you the 3 red flags that we look for anytime we hear someone talking about banking. So let's get right into it, starting with the 7 horrible pieces of banking advice. And the first piece of bad advice is open accounts in secrecy jurisdictions. Now listen, we're all for privacy, but in 99.9% of cases, you should not bank in these so-called secrecy jurisdictions. In fact, even people that live in these jurisdictions, they're usually better off banking somewhere else. But we're talking about banking as a foreigner, a foreign non-resident. And there are 2 big reasons why foreign non-residents, meaning you, shouldn't bank in secrecy jurisdictions. First, because the kind of countries that these YouTubers are telling you to bank in, think places like Serbia, the Dominican Republic, Paraguay, El Salvador, Armenia, Cambodia, the Philippines, etc., most of these places, they're not actually secrecy jurisdictions. And before you say, but these are all non-CRS countries, you need to understand that they all comply with other information sharing conventions, like the Exchange of Information on Request, EOIR, and the Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, or MAAC. The point is, these places, they're not secrecy jurisdictions. Now, the second big reason that foreigners should avoid these countries is because the banks in these countries, they're not very good. I'm going to dig into this a bit more when we get to item number 3 on our list. But first, I want to tell you about one of the scariest pieces of advice I've ever heard on YouTube, which is use fraudulent documents. And no, this isn't new. There's a lot of sketchy actors with shady strategies in every industry. But what's really alarming about this particular piece of advice is who shared it. Now, I'm not going to name names, but a professional recently recommended creating fraudulent lease agreements in order to meet the onboarding requirements of certain banks in certain countries, which is crazy. And it's crazy for 2 main reasons. First, if fraud is detected by the bank after you open the account will be closed immediately. But you could also be blacklisted via check systems or other financial databases depending on where you open, which will seriously limit your future banking options. And you could even face fines or other penalties. Now, the second reason it's so crazy is that it's 100% unnecessary. In every country, there are banks that will open accounts for foreign non-resident individuals like you without a local address. And yes, this even includes in countries like the United States where people tell you it's impossible to open without an address. So the lesson here, don't commit fraud and don't listen to sketchy service providers that tell you to commit fraud because there are very real consequences. Just open with the right banks instead. And speaking of the right banks, that's exactly what I'm going to cover in number 4 on this list. But first, I need to jump back into the topic of countries because horrible banking advice number 3 is bank in low quality countries. Now, there's a lot of bad advice out there, but this particular gem to bank in low quality countries is probably the most dangerous piece of banking advice on YouTube. And it's because people actually believe it. And as a result, they end up banking in horrible backwater banking hubs, the kind of places that you should never bank in unless you literally don't have any other options or you live there. And if that's you, then go for it. Open accounts in Serbia, Armenia, Georgia, Paraguay. You can even open accounts in Belize if you really need to, or if you actually live there in the country or spend considerable amounts of time there. But in our experience, almost everyone can and should open bank accounts in better banking hubs around the world. I mean, really, some of these places, they demand deposits of $10,000, $25,000, even $50,000 just to get in the door. And given how horrific the quality of these banks are in these countries, deposits at these levels are crazy. But it's not just the banks. Often, these places don't have strong regulators. They have weak compliance systems. Their online banking is archaic, security is non-existent, and the products and services are subpar, and they charge really high fees. So what I'm saying is if you can open bank accounts in more stable and reputable countries that offer better customer support, a wider selection of products, and it costs you less money with the same or lower deposits, then why would you ever consider one of these low quality banking hubs instead? Let me tell you, it's because YouTubers keep pushing them, and that's often because they're pushing specific banks. And that brings us to the 4th piece of bad banking advice that we hear on YouTube, which is, this bank is perfect. Now, let me tell you a secret. in a practical sense, there's no such thing as a perfect bank. Each bank has pros and cons, it's that simple. And the goal is to find the bank or banks that best match your specific needs, your profile, your desired deposit, the risk factors associated with your profile, and the related jurisdictions that you're sending money to and from. So sitting back, speaking into a camera, and telling everyone that you should open with Julius Baer, Lombard Odier, UBS, DBS, OCBC, Bank of America, Chase, or any other bank on the planet, it doesn't actually work. Because it's impossible to say which bank is best for which person without fully understanding the applicant, their profile, their needs, and the bank as well. So it's extremely frustrating when we see YouTubers out here promoting specific banks, especially digital banks, online banking platforms, and telling people to open accounts. Because in most cases, the people listening to these videos, they don't even qualify to open with those banks that are being promoted. So why do financial influencers do this? It's because they're getting paid, either through advertising, commissions, or when new accounts are opened, or even for lead generation. Basically, the banks or platforms, they pay these YouTubers to talk about them. But that's not how we operate. You won't find us promoting banks to the masses that aren't a good fit. Instead, we strongly believe that finding the right bank for each person, each business, or each structure, it requires an understanding of each applicant's objectives, their profile, the risks, and other variables that I've already mentioned. So before you go and apply to the bank off the back of a YouTube video, make sure you qualify whether the bank actually wants customers like you in the first place. Okay, switching gears. The next piece of bad banking advice that you'll find on YouTube is at the other end of the spectrum. And instead of telling you where to bank, it tells you to avoid a specific country, which is insane because this country, it happens to be one of the best banking options out there for foreigners, foreign non-residents. But before I share it, if you have made it this far in the video and you haven't already hit the like and subscribe button, please do, so we know that we should keep making more videos like this for you. All right, bad banking advice number 5. Never bank in the United States. This is fear-mongering at the extreme. The US is one of the most sophisticated banking jurisdictions on the planet, period. Foreign non-residents from around the world can open bank accounts here. They can even build US credit history, access US credit cards, mortgages, and investment products without ever visiting the country. Now, do US banks fail? Yes, they do. But they are backed by deposit insurance from the US federal government. And if the US government is no longer able to backstop the banking sector, we have a seriously bigger problem on a global scale that we will all need to worry about, regardless of where we bank. Now, if you're still worried, that's fine. We never suggest depositing more than the $250,000 insurance limit. And you need to make sure that the banks that you open with are reputable. It's simple. So why do these gurus tell you to avoid the US? Because it doesn't serve their narrative. They can't keep selling products to Americans if Americans think that US banks are stable and there's no reason to bank overseas. So they tell them the US is about to collapse, the banking system is doomed, and the Federal Reserve is about to run out of money. And listen, all of that might be true on a long enough time horizon, but if we're talking about practical banking options and you're just trying to access stable, sound, and functional banking, the US is still one of the best bets out there. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't diversify or access investment products or other currencies in other jurisdictions. All of that can and still does make a lot of sense. But the point is, you shouldn't completely eliminate one of the best banking options out there just because a few YouTubers are spinning up fear, especially when you can open US accounts 100% remotely with very reasonable deposits from the comfort of your own home. And that brings us to the next piece of horrible advice. And this one is one that we hear from some of the biggest names in the offshore industry. Avoid remote opening. Now, this might be one of the stupidest things I've ever heard anyone say about international banking. It literally makes no sense to me whatsoever. I mean, do you think entrepreneurs, executives, or even the average guy with a family has time to jump on a plane and go open a bank account on a whim? And why would they? Almost every bank that we deal with, and I'm talking about the most reputable banks anywhere in the world, they offer remote account opening. So unless you're already planning on visiting a country, why wouldn't you open your bank accounts remotely? It saves you tons of hours running back and forth to the bank, meeting with bankers, filling out paperwork, and not to mention the lost hours you could have spent doing anything else. Plus, showing up in person, it's gonna cost you thousands of dollars in flights, hotels, taxis, other incidentals that will come up when you're traveling. And don't forget, even after spending all that time and that money, there's no guarantee that the account is going to be open. So again, why wouldn't you open bank accounts remotely? And just to be clear, I'm talking about opening remotely with real brick and mortar banks in top banking hubs around the world and some of the best banks that anybody can access. And yes, this includes with reasonable deposits, responsive bankers, and like I said, world-class banks. Which brings me to the final piece of horrible banking advice on YouTube. and it's that digital banks are awesome. Now, I'm gonna set the record straight. These digital banks, they pay influencers on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, etc., to promote the hell out of their so-called banking platforms. But the vast majority, think 90+% of these platforms, they don't have banking licenses. They're not regulated, and they're not covered by deposit insurance, even though they say they are. Now, there is some difference depending on the country or the jurisdictions where you're considering opening accounts. For example, the US regulation, it's way behind places like Europe, the UK, and parts of Asia. And thanks to massive advertising budgets of these VC-backed digital banking platforms, the US market, it's flooded with positive reviews, promotional videos, and comparisons telling you which of these digital banks you should open with, which means you're never getting an unbiased opinion about these platforms. Instead, you're just getting a paid-for advertisement that basically tells you to click the affiliate link and open an account. That is, unless you're listening to our videos and reading our articles, because we don't accept commissions, we don't have affiliate links, and we don't promote specific banking platforms. Because like I told you in horrible advice number 4, it's not realistic to promote one bank or platform to an entire audience. It doesn't work that way. And that's a nice segue to the first of the 3 red flags that you need to watch out for when someone is sharing banking advice online, which is, how do they make money? And listen, I'll go first. GlobalBanks sells account opening solutions. We help people and businesses navigate cross-border banking and financial services. And we do that all over the world. We're not beholden to any single country, any single bank, and our interests are 100% aligned with those of the person or business that we're helping. So when we share information in videos like this, it's 100% focused on helping you find and open accounts in countries that actually meet your needs. Now, can the social media influencer with a video about a hot new digital banking platform who wants you to click an affiliate link say the same thing? No, of course not, because they're incentivized to get as many people as possible to open with that digital bank. And can the guy selling services to help people escape the US really say that his advice to avoid US banks is objective? Of course he can, because he wants people to think the US is crumbling so they buy more of his services. So before you listen to anyone's advice, just ask yourself, is this objective? What does this person get out of it if I listen to them? What's their motivation? And I'm actually going to take this a step further with the final red flag that I'll share, and it will make you completely rethink where you want to open in the first place. First, red flag number 2 is, are they banking experts? Seriously, if someone is giving you banking advice, an important question is, are they qualified to give you that advice? On our end, we've helped thousands of people, businesses, and structures solve their cross-border banking problems. I've personally been banking internationally for 20 years, and while there are a few guys out here who have banked overseas, it's often an afterthought. It's not the main focus of what they do or what they talk about, or what they help their clients solve. But the worst of the worst is when we see influencers, these guys with affiliate links, who have zero banking knowledge, no background in financial services, and no clue how to qualify banks, promoting banks. And that's when people get hurt. They lose access to their money and they get in financial trouble when the sort of banking platforms that they go to go under. So the next time you're listening to banking advice, make sure you ask yourself, is this person really qualified to tell me whether this bank is good or not? Then you can start to consider whether you should even listen to them. All right, now, like I said, red flag number 3, it's gonna completely change the way you think about where to open accounts. In fact, I hope it does. And that's because red flag number 3 is, do they promote shady countries? You don't need to be an international banking expert to know when someone is promoting shady countries. Basically, you just need to ask yourself 3 questions. Now, number 1, has the country been involved in any war in the last 10 years? Number 2, is this country incorrectly promoted as a secrecy jurisdiction? And question number 3 is, what does GlobalBanks think about this country? Now, number 1 and number 2 on this list, they're pretty self-explanatory. We've already covered secrecy jurisdictions and why you should avoid them. And obviously, you should not be banking in a country that is or has recently been involved in active conflict. This is also true if neighboring countries are geopolitical aggressors, think Russia, and especially if there's disputed territories or there's a likelihood of future aggression. And in case you're wondering, the Republic of Georgia, it ticks all of these boxes. Now, you might think I'm joking about number 3 on this list. What does GlobalBanks think about this country? But I'm not. We don't have any financial incentive to promote or talk poorly about any country in particular. So we're just giving you the reality of banking, the good and the bad. And you can go find out what we think about banking in over 100 countries on our website, globalbanks.com, 100% free. Or if you want our team to tell you if you qualify to bank in any of these countries or you need help solving banking problems, you can complete a free assessment at globalbanks.com/apply. Our team will review your information and give you an objective take on whether you can open the accounts that you want or not. We'll even share a few alternative options with you in case you want to explore other countries. And speaking of other countries, if you want to know the best places to open offshore and international bank accounts today, you can go ahead and click here. I'll give you 5 of our favorite countries, including account opening requirements, the deposits you're going to have to make, and which client profiles are best suited to each of these jurisdictions. Plus, the final country on this list is one that will